Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today I'm gonna give you a full review of the 2024 Thomas H. Handy Rye Whiskey. And at the end of this video, I will compare it to last year's 2023 release. But before we get into any of that, I wanna very quickly say thank you to a good friend of mine, Justin, for lending me both of these bottles and making today's video possible. And one other thing that I wanna say at the beginning of this video is that there are some of these Buffalo Trace Antique Collection bottles that I'm less familiar with than others. And so I would say that most years I get to taste George T. Stagg, some years WLW, but when it comes down to Eagle Rare 17, Sazerac 18, and this Thomas H. Handy Rye Whiskey, I'm not as familiar with those other three bottlings. And so I don't have a great grasp of their profile. I don't really know what to expect when I pick one of these up. And so I think today's video is gonna be important, not only to review this 2024, for those of you who might have the chance to purchase this on the secondary market, or maybe overpay a little bit in a store, or maybe you have the good fortune of being friends with your local liquor store owner and you have the chance at SRP to pick up this Thomas H. Handy, or maybe even the opportunity for, kind of a decision where your local liquor store owner says, hey, listen, I've got this one or this one, which one do you want? And you're trying to decide between different allocated products. Maybe this is an option, maybe you're trying to figure out if it's one that you should pick up, and I hope this video helps you. But at the same time, the 2023 comparison at the end of this video, I think should be helpful for those of you who are like me and you don't really know this profile, you don't know how they vary from year to year. And so I think today I'm gonna learn something. Hopefully it helps you kind of learn a little something as well as I go through this. But as always, taste for yourself. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And now it's time to get into this review and comparison at the end. The 2024 Thomas H. Handy, which we're gonna start with, is clocking in at 127.2 proof. And last year's edition, 2023, is 124.9, so just a little bit lower. These are typically 6-year barrel-proof rye whiskeys from Buffalo Trace. SRP around 125 bucks, current secondary around 450. And now that all of that is out of the way, let's get into today's review, and check out this 2024 edition on the nose. Here we go. All right, guys, so on the nose, this is a very sweet and inviting rye whiskey. It's got a lot of kind of fruit-driven qualities to it, and I think that's part of the reason that I say that it's inviting. It's got this kind of blueberry syrup thing going on. At the same time, it also has these brighter, more summery fruit cocktail notes where I get peach and kind of maraschino cherry hanging out there too. But all the while, there's also this kind of underpinning of spice and more typical rye notes that you might expect from, like a young-ish 6-year barrel-proof rye whiskey. There's kind of this herbal spice going on in here. I wouldn't say that it's dill. It's more of like a minty, maybe more of like a pine note actually on this one. There's also like some pepperiness, a little bit of a cinnamon element in there too. And then also with a rye whiskey, you might expect some citrus notes. And I think in this one, it's more of like a sweet lemon that I'm picking up on. So all in all, like first impression on the nose is really good. Let's go back in one more time before we go to the palate. Yeah, and the last thing that I'm gonna add to this would really be two notes. Number one is kind of this toasty, inviting, like breadiness almost. So I pick up not only a toasted bread element, but also kind of like a doughiness and slight yeast note in here too. And then also there's a tinge of this kind of torched orange note, which is not uncommon for rye whiskeys by any means. And so overall, I think I'm getting good complexity from this rye. I'm getting a disproportionate amount of sweetness from such a young rye whiskey, I would say. And the sweetness balanced with the spice, with a little bit of this like savory herbal, pine note almost in there. All of that plays together to create kind of a complex whiskey. It's got layers on the nose. And so now let's see if that translates to the palate. Cheers, guys. Wow, yeah, so first impression of this whiskey on the palate is a very positive one. I think the beginning of this whiskey on the palate is full-bodied. It's extremely spicy. I mean, this definitely takes over your palate right away, lets you know that it's a rye whiskey. And I think for me, I get more of those rye qualities on the palate than I did on the nose. Again, the nose, very fruit-driven, very sweet, complex, toasty, little savory herbal, but on the palate, man, it's really driven with those kind of herbal spices, pepper spices up front. Good amount of kind of like spicy barrel influence in there too. It doesn't feel like a young oak note by any means. This is very much a well-developed oak note for a 6-year whiskey, I've got to say. I mean, it drinks more like an 8 to 10 year product. And so up front, it's a commanding whiskey on the palate. As it develops, you do get into some of those sweeter notes on the mid palate. I especially pick up that kind of sweet lemon note that I talked about on the nose. And then you get into the finish, and it's kind of a play between those sweet and spicy notes. It's stellar. I mean, I think this is really good stuff. And frankly, I didn't expect such a positive experience from a 6-year barrel proof rye whiskey, especially one that has as much hype and kind of rarity as Thomas H. Handy. It's in the antique collection. You can never really find these. I mean, I'll never have the chance to buy one of these at SRP. But even so, like, I think this kind of lives up to the hype a little bit. I think this is a really nice rye. So let's go back in for a second sip now. All right, so second sip of this whiskey is almost as intense as the first, and I think that's a really positive sign for, you know, such a rare whiskey, an allocated whiskey, and really just a whiskey of a high quality. I think you want every subsequent sip to be pretty much as intense as the last one. You never want it to fall flat. You don't want to get so acclimated to the whiskey that it starts to drink, you know, kind of watery. You want that spice to maintain itself, especially when you're talking about a rye whiskey like this. And I think this 2024 Thomas Handy, I think it holds your interest the entire time. So the second sip, big herbal and big peppery notes up front, maybe a tinge of like an anise quality in here, like a little bit of a licorice type thing going on. But what's interesting to me on this second sip is that now I'm really picking up a dark fruit kind of, almost like a dark fruit syrup note. It starts in the mid palate, it goes all the way through the finish. I would call it almost like a blueberry syrup. It's fresh, it's not candied, it's not like a reduction, it's just fresh kind of blueberry syrup or blueberry juice, I guess. I don't know, but it's very much a blueberry note, I would say. So for me, with a long finish, with a very intense and gripping palate experience, complexity, and you know, kind of holding your interest from sip to sip, I would say this is a highly recommended pour for 2024 for me. If this is what Thomas H. Handy is like normally, then I completely understand why it's in the antique collection. Because for a long time, I've wondered, 6-year barrel proof rye, what is this doing next to WLW, you know, a 12-year wheater, 15-year GTS, 18-year Sazerac rye? Like, what is this doing in the collection? And if this is any indication of what, you know, this release is like from year to year, then I understand why this is in the collection. But without, you know, going too much further into this 2024 now, I think it's time to check out the 2023 and just see what this comparison is like side by side. So I might go back and forth here a few times, but first let's go ahead and start with this 2023. Again, slightly lower proof, 124.9 on the nose, and see what we get. Wow, so this is actually remarkably different on the nose as compared to the 2024. This is much more indistinct, I would say. Like, I'm not getting as much of a fruit forward nose, but beyond that, I'm just not getting much of a discernible nose more generally. Like, this feels almost more like a neutral profile for a whiskey. And you know what's funny about this is that the 2023 Thomas H. Handy showed up in a blind flight on a live stream I did a month or two ago at the time that I'm recording this video. And it was actually sent by Justin, who you know, donated these bottles for this video. And what's funny is I called this a Canadian whiskey in my blind flight. And I always wondered if I was silly for doing that because maybe my palate was off that day. I'm gonna stand by that. Like, this feels almost like you took a Canadian whiskey, which is more of a neutral profile, and you put it into maybe a secondary barrel to try to add some flavor to it and add some interest and complexity. That's kind of what this 2023 feels like. It's more woody, and I do still get some dark fruit notes here, like I did in the 2024. I actually get more on the nose of the 2023, that kind of blueberry syrupy thing I'm talking about. But otherwise, all of those other fruit notes, the toasted bread element, the yeastiness, the sweetness, I don't feel like I'm getting that on the nose of the 2023. Yeah, in fact, I'm gonna stand by that. I mean, I think this is much more of an anemic profile. It's more anise driven, a little bit more, yeah, like licorice driven, and kind of bittersweet and spicy, I guess I want to say. So let's just go to the palate now and see if this compares to the 2024 in any kind of way. I think this is more of a rye lover's rye whiskey, and I never really noticed when I tasted the 2024 that it's kind of like a bourbon lover's rye, but with this comparison now, it's all kind of coming together for me. So 2023, definitely more rye driven, it's more herbal, it's actually got a little bit of a dill note to it, which the 2024 did not have, but also it does have, I think, a little bit more spice, even at the lower proof, than the 2024 did. The 2024, again, rich fruit notes, very sweet and inviting. This is less inviting, more of a challenge and bittersweet grippiness to the palate. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad whiskey, but when it comes to the rarity, the markup on secondary, just kind of the hype, generally speaking, surrounding any of these BTAC bottles, I think the 2023 is a little bit of a letdown for me. Kind of what I said at the beginning of this video, I think it's interesting to see what this is like year to year. If this much of a difference is present from 2023 to 2024, and that's a typical thing in this series, then I think Thomas H. Handy's are kind of a crapshoot. Now, it's hard to extrapolate that out of only 2 years, and so hopefully in the future I get the chance to try some earlier editions and hopefully, also some later editions as they continue to be released. I can't confidently say that if you blindly buy a Thomas H. Handy that you're gonna be satisfied. However, what I can say is that the 2024 should satisfy you, and the 2023 would be for maybe a more particular audience, perhaps those that enjoy maybe like a Found North product or other finished and decently aged Canadian whiskeys. I think the 2023 will do it for you. But for more bourbon drinkers and folks that might align with my palate a little bit more, I think the 2024 is gonna be more up your alley. So that's gonna do it, guys, for this video. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Justin, for letting me try both of these bottles. Let me know if you've had either of these in the comment section and what you think of them. Like, comment, subscribe. Cheers, and I will see you guys soon here on Drums and Drams.